Hi, this is Rick Curtis, and I'm putting this video together for our trainers at the 2017 CPC Regional Training. And so the purpose of this video is for you, the trainer, to understand the main points that we want to cover in this presentation. Now, at the same time, I also want to encourage you to put in your own analogies, your own experience, add to the presentation your own flair. This is going to be a very bland recording because I'm just hitting the highlights, the important things that we need you to convey during that presentation. That being said, feel free to add some bullet points to the keynotes. They are editable. However, don't deviate too drastically from the content. Any changes to the content, I will need you to send to me so that I can approve those. If you're adding your own material, you can send me those additions at rcurtis@nam.net. Otherwise, your own life experience, your own personal nuances, by all means, we want that. We want your personality engaging the audience. The big umbrella here is that we need to equip our CPCs to be better communicators. One of the things our CPCs are going to find during this training is that they're going to be continually encouraged to up their relational game with their church planners. We need our church planting catalysts to be in deep relationship with each of their church planners. Not like, hey, come over for dinner type relationship, but relationship at the level where the CPC knows that they can find assistance, help, mentorship, coaching, or any other resources through the church planting catalyst. One of the great deficiencies we see in many of our church planting catalysts is that they are very uncomfortable with having difficult conversations with planters or partners, and we need to up that game. So the synopsis for this training really is that our church planting catalysts have to be equipped to formulate an accurate assessment whether or not our church planners are ready to plant or not. And then to have the conversations related to that. Should they continue on? Should they move into training? Or should they just pack it up and do something completely different? This session really needs to help the CPC recognize the necessary indicators and then help them to learn how to facilitate a difficult conversation and guide that church planter into the future that God has for them. Our expected outcomes would be that each CPC would leave with an appreciation for the importance of very candid, loving conversations. They should feel empowered to be more assertive in their assessment of candidates and understand that they have a responsibility to lead out in this area. Many man hours can be wasted by forwarding guys to the assessment retreat when they really should not be going forward. They should either be doing something completely different or be sent back to a development track. In session 1 of the training, we will be talking about the leadership pipeline, and that plays very importantly into this whole conversation. We need to be ready to send people into development as opposed to on to church planting when they have major deficiencies. So like I said, this presentation is provided to you as a trainer so that you can hit the major items. This session is more about best practices than about lecture. And so you're going to have to, as the trainer, facilitate discussions in the room. There is an activity session at the end that should go fairly well, fairly easy, but there is a middle part of the first slide where you are going to engage the church planners in some best practices discussion. So we'll talk about that when we get there. So let's go to the first slide, and I will begin to present this presentation. Hello everyone, this is Rick Curtis. I am the National CPC Director for the North American Mission Board, as well as serving as NAM's West Region Mobilizer. Today we're talking about vetting church planters. As a church planting catalyst, you have as one of your many important duties the vetting of church planters prior to moving them forward to become church planters. There are many ways to do this. A lot of those are very subjective, but there are some very tangible, concrete ways to do that. The first of which is using our pre-assessment. Our pre-assessment is a pretty robust solution to getting your head around and getting an idea of the readiness of our church planters. And really, it's the first step to getting an idea about the candidate's readiness. Now remember, one thing I want you to know is that throughout these couple days of training, you're going to hear a recurring theme over and over again, that you need to build better relationships with your church planters than we've ever had in the past. We're not talking about relationships like, hey, come over to dinner, meet my family, that kind of relationships, but professional relationships where the church planter realizes that you are their advocate, you are their point of contact, and that you have their best interest at heart. We really want to use as a measure that we could call any of your church planters and say, hey, what do you think about your CPC? And their reaction would immediately be, hey, I love that guy, because they know that you are their best resource for moving forward in their church plant. So reviewing that pre-assessment with them in person is important to go over their strengths and their weaknesses. We want to capitalize on their strengths, right? We want them aware of that. What hurts our church planters is they don't know what they don't know, and you're there to facilitate that discussion, enabling them to embrace their strengths and then to work on their weaknesses. We need to be unafraid to show them that, hey, according to your personality type, these are the weaknesses that you have, and this is how you can overcome those. These are some practical awareness tools that you can use and do to overcome those gaps and those deficiencies, and that you need to work on those to become better at your craft. The pre-assessment tool is a great way to initiate that conversation and begin building that relationship with the church planters. Now I'm going to pause here and give another note to the trainers. As you train this piece, when this second bullet comes up, this is where you'll enter into some give and take in the room. We want to add some kinetic energy to the room, get people talking a little bit, so it's not all listening. So the point comes up, what other steps assure due diligence? At this point, you want to give it over to the audience and begin a best practices discussion. What are some of the best practices that you guys use to assure that you're unpacking everything that you need to unpack? What are some of the things you look for in the candidate's demeanor, in his body language? What are some of the triggers you listen for in his conversation? What are the other ways of assessing that church planter in a face-to-face environment? As you explore the conversations in the room, one question you may ask during that process is, if a planter gets a red in the 2-day assessment, did the CPC or Send City Missionary fail to properly vet the candidate? This is a valid question to ask, but in a real sense, yes. If a planter gets a red, then somebody failed to vet them properly moving forward into the assessment retreat. Now, here's the caveat to that. There are always things that pop up that nobody knew about. And so in those cases, we can't hold the CPC or SCM responsible for that lack of insight. However, many times when our candidates get a red, our CPC forwarded them to the 2-day assessment knowing that it was an iffy proposition in the first place. And these are the cases that we're trying to get away from, to preemptively prevent. At this point, you want to shift back to the narrative and advance the slide to the next point. Difficult conversations about readiness. This is where we want to engage our church planting catalysts and not only empower them, but in many cases, we need to back up from empowerment and convince them that they are the ones that need to have the difficult conversations. Whether we be with the candidate, whether it be with the sending church, or whether it be with the partners, it is their responsibility to have those situations. You know as well as I do, there are so many different scenarios at play here when we have a weak candidate and we have sending church partners and a bunch of people at the table, supporting churches, etc. Let's start with the candidate. How do you have those difficult conversations with the candidate? How do you begin to share with them that you don't feel that they're qualified to plant a church. Ultimately, it's their choice, right? However, you can, at some level, recommend a step back into the pipeline discussion. Session 1 at this training was about the pipeline, the leadership pipeline, at level 1, level 2, and level 3. We can engage them in those conversations based on the pre-assessment, based on our own assessment of them, and recommend additional training in certain areas. Remember, if we've done the pre-assessment, we should have a good idea about their gaps as well as their strengths. So we can use those weaknesses or gaps in their skill set to promote moving back into the leadership pipeline. Another scenario we encounter from time to time is that a candidate may even sense that they're not ready, but the sending church or a partnering church is pushing them to plant a church on their behalf. We need to really be ready, and this leads to point number 2, to have those conversations with the sending church. As a CPC, you should have no hesitation in working with the sending church in conjunction with your church planner. The sending churches, for the most part, want to hear what you have to say. You are the field assessor. You are the one looking at that candidate from a field perspective. Unless the sending church is a local sending church, then you have a grasp of local context that they don't. They need to hear from you. They need to have that conversation with you, because ultimately, as a sending church, they're going to want their candidate to succeed. And the same goes with partners as well. Where that conversation gets really difficult is where sending churches, supporting churches, partners, other partners have allocated budget funds or something to help this church plant, and then you come in and say he's not ready. It causes a little bit of a logistical nightmare for them. However, it's important that you're ready to have those conversations with them. Make suggestions for how they can be involved still with the church planner, even if he's back to the pipeline. At the end of this presentation, I will have on the screen a recommended book, but Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson is a book that every church planning catalyst should read. And you'll find its recommendation on the last page of this presentation. Another important aspect of the church planning catalyst job is to follow up for human resources. Many in this room are familiar with that email from Human Resources that says, hey, upon review of your church planner John Smith's application, we found that he has a felony arrest dated from 1992 and that he has a bankruptcy, etc., etc. However, many church planning catalysts don't understand what their role is when they get that email from Human Resources. So let's clear that up. It is the CPC's job to sit down with the candidate with any of those yellow flags, have a conversation with them about that, make some determination based on that conversation, whether we can even move forward or not move forward, and then to summarize that, prepare a narrative with details that you send to your regional mobilizer and back to Human Resources or the missionary processing team, which allows your regional mobilizer then to speak in and give approval to move forward with that church planter. So again, as a church planning catalyst, it's your responsibility to sit down with the candidate, to do it personally. I think personal is the only way to do it. Sit down personally, unpack that divorce or that felony conviction or that bankruptcy or whatever other item that Human Resources has flagged. Unpack that with them, prepare a narrative with your personal recommendation to move forward with the candidate or to stop or to move them to development. Forward that to your regional mobilizer as well as a return email to missionary processing so that your regional mobilizer can make the final determination. There will be sufficient time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Even though this would seem like a really good time to stop and do Q&A, I'm going to encourage you to push on past it to the activity time. The reason is the activities may actually, by the wisdom of the group, solve or answer some of the issues that they would ask at this point, and that's going to leave more time for Q&A and debrief at the end. So at this point, I would move forward to the next slide, which is our first scenario. For the scenarios, what we need you to do is we need you to break the participants up into small groups. I don't know what your venue has, but if it's a table of 8, then that's fine. I really don't like 8. It's too big of a group. But if that's how you're situated, then that's fine. Just go with that. If you're in longs or straight tables, try to get them to divide in groups of 3 to 5 and then circle them around. And the activities are simple. The group is going to discuss or explore the necessary conversations related to the new information that they're going to receive on the screen. In other words, a scenario will come up on the slide, and then they will need to talk about that scenario amongst themselves, and then they need to formulate how that conversation would look at the table. Then, as a point of practicality, they should role play that conversation. Assign one person as the church planter and another person as the CPC, and engage in role play. Again, list the necessary actions. 2, decide if he will move forward or not. Why? Will he assess or not? Why? And then role play each necessary conversation using a different person each time a question comes up. As a trainer, if you have a scenario that you feel is specific enough in your region and pertinent or resonates well in your region, feel free to send that to me via email, rcurtis@nam.net. Let me review that and approve that if you want to move it into your presentation. Otherwise, I have 5 standard scenarios in the presentation, and we'll go over those each one at a time right here. A couple things I want you to note before we go into the activity is that each slide has the situation. Each slide has the data that you may need to know about the planter. That is, do they have a sending church or not? Do they have associational support? That's where you're going to discuss with whom you have to have a conversation or not have a conversation. And then there's a timer. We're going to try to abide by the timer because it's going to keep us all focused and on time. It's a 5-minute timer on each page. So let's go to the actual scenarios. Scenario 1. Your candidate is a weak communicator and he has low self-confidence. Both he and his wife are unsure that they are called to plant a church. However, the sending church is pressuring them to do so. This church planter has a sending church, a supporting church, conventional support, and associational support. So he's quite supported, yet this is a difficult conversation that will have to be had. Scenario 2. Your candidate and his wife both have divorces in their past for a total of 3 divorces. They insist that their 3-month marriage is perfect and they are ready to move to the city and plant a church. Their prepare and enrich is conventional. Planter data, he has a sending church, supporting church. The convention is not supporting him, and the association is supporting him. Of note, as you train through this, if nobody gets it, somebody needs to ask the question, why is the convention not supporting them? Do they know something about the candidate that is unrevealed? You're looking for those blind spots. Scenario 3. One of your candidates' references has indicated that he used to have an issue with pornography. Another reference seems to indicate that they were uncomfortable recommending him. He has a sending church, 3 supporting churches, and conventional support. Scenario 4. Your candidate speaks on behalf of his wife on almost every occasion, stating that she is totally behind him as a church planter. But you observe in her body language that she is very uncomfortable and she's hesitant to speak over her husband. He's got a sending church, 2 supporting churches, both conventional and associational support. What do those conversations look like? Scenario 5. Your candidate comes across as extremely arrogant. He may simply have high self-confidence. You're not really sure. However, he seems insulted by being asked to go through assessment and assures you that it is not needed, that he will do fine. He's a church planter from a very connected, if you know what I mean, sending church, 2 supporting churches, and he has conventional and associational support. Finally, as a trainer, after you've gone through each of those scenarios, you'll have a corporate debrief and question and answer. In other words, everybody's participating all together at this point. They've turned their chairs back around. You are the focal point as the trainer, and you ask them what questions came up, what things do we need to unpack? What are the major takeaways? Those kind of things. And then on the second click of that slide, you'll get your Crucial Conversations recommendation for a book read.